Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our probably at this point 20th webinar in general, and our first webinar on EcoVadis. I'm joined today by Freddie. Freddie and I are both sustainability researchers here at Coolset, and have been spending the last months diving into many ESG frameworks, including EcoVadis. So for those that have been with us for a bit, you might have seen EcoVadis come across on our LinkedIn pages quite a bit, as we've launched our module a couple of months ago. Yeah, we thought now is a good time to kind of share some of those insights, also because we're seeing the landscape changing quite a bit. So we're seeing a lot more companies reporting on EcoVadis, considering that the voluntary reporting landscape has changed towards more commercial platforms, which has to do also kind of with the changing EU regulatory landscape. But more about that in a second. I don't want to spoil too much, but that's just a bit of background about why we're hosting today. Yeah, I'm very excited to see that many of you signed up for this. Once again, please put all of your questions throughout the webinar in the question tab in the bottom right next to the chat function. And yeah, then we're really looking forward to answering those questions during the Q&A at the end. For all of the questions that we don't get to answer due to time constraints, we'll be sure to get back to you over email. But for now, yeah, let's kick off and start with a plan for today. So we're going to look at EcoVadis at a glance. So what does it entail? What does it include? And then we're going to dive straight into the methodology to explain, how it works. Then we'll go over to the practical preparation and, of course, explain how you can actually get towards platinum, which is the highest kind of segment of you can reach within EcoVadis. Then we'll briefly break it down within 5 steps to success. And then, of course, leave enough time for all of your Q&A questions. So at a glance, what does EcoVadis mean? I'm going to give the word to my colleague, Freddie, who will tell you more about this.
Thank you. Yeah, so EcoVadis is a commercial assessment platform which provides sustainability management ratings at business level. And the EcoVadis platform is used by over 130,000 rated companies across 180 countries. And the platform helps businesses manage their ESG risks and compliance and take the first steps into improving their ESG practices. It also provides a standardized ESG benchmark across industries, as so many businesses using EcoVadis. It helps businesses understand where they stand in comparison to others in their industry. And why it matters: EcoVadis is often baked into procurement requirements such as RFPs, contract terms, and awards. Many buyers are now requiring EcoVadis, and 46% already do. So it's important, if you want to become a supplier, to have this ESG assessment and standard. And post-omnibus, as Jasper mentioned earlier, companies are preferring to have commercial stamp-ready certifications over voluntary standards such as VSME. So again, the kind of market and landscape changes, it's lending towards a more commercial stamp-ready ESG certification. And finally, EcoVadis is setting a benchmark for global sustainability performance. The assessment itself is made up of 4 themes: environment, labor and human rights, ethics, and sustainable procurement. And these themes are themselves made up of 21 sustainability criteria, which are applied depending on industry, size, and country. So each business gets a specific mix of these sustainability criteria, depending on their specific business needs. The assessment depends on only documented evidence. So any unsupported claims uploaded during the EcoVadis assessment get no credit. So it's an evidence-based assessment. And at the end of the assessment, you get a scorecard which shows the overall and theme scores with your strength and improvement areas. So it breaks down your scoring into different themes so you can see where you're excelling and which areas you need to take a bit more work on. And finally, the medals are awarded based on your percentile rank across all other companies under EcoVadis. So it's not out of 100, but yeah, it's your percentile and how you compare to other companies. We've got a question for you here. Has the omnibus proposal affected your decision to work with EcoVadis? So you can vote with your answer in the poll section at the bottom. And either yes, it's pushed us towards EcoVadis, or no, it hasn't influenced your decision. Seeing some scores come in. Cool. Many of you saying, yeah, it's pushed you towards EcoVadis, but a majority, over 75%, saying no, it hasn't influenced your decision to work with EcoVadis. So maybe you were already doing that before, or it hasn't changed your decision now. Great.
Very quickly, Alicia said she can't hear us. I haven't seen any other comments that this is the case. So if other people cannot hear us, please let us know. I guess it's hard for you to hear this, but please let us know if you can hear us. I guess that's a better question to ask. And yeah, I see Dominga also asking a question. Feel free to put that in the Q&A tab in the bottom right, and we'll get back to it at the end. Yeah.
Thanks, Jasper. Moving on to the EcoVadis methodology. So how does EcoVadis evaluate its score? It uses 3 specific scoring layers: policies, actions, and results, to come up with a total EcoVadis score. Firstly, we've got policies. So these are the formal commitments with governance, targets, and top management sign-off. This accounts for 25% of your EcoVadis score, which is the smallest proportion in the total score. And then we have actions, so programs, procedures, external certifications, external audits, and training and supplier assessments. And this is where the bulk of your scoring lies. So this is what EcoVadis really depends on. It's the actions you as a business are taking to improve your ESG. And finally, we've got results. So this is 1 to 3 years of KPIs, trends, external assurance, and awards or recognition. So considering how your business is improving or changing across time. And the EcoVadis scoring favors evidence of implementation and outcomes over paper commitments. So whilst it's important to have those policies, the actions are really what matters. And the scoring is then made up of 7 management indicators. So these inform the policies, actions, and results. And they're all weighted differently, again, weighted more in favor of the actions and the evidence rather than the policies, but they still play an important part. So we can see here, firstly, we have policies. So these are those formal commitments with governance, objectives, and targets. EcoVadis specifically favors policies that have CEO or C-suite buy-in. So particularly sustainability policies that are signed by the CEO and kind of implemented at that highest level. We've got endorsements, so membership in recognized initiatives such as SBTI or GHCB, these external endorsements. Then we have the measures. So these are concrete actions like training, audits, or supplier programs. So involving your suppliers in ESG training and audits and ensuring that your ESG expands not only in your business, but also beyond. Certifications are recognized, ISO, FSC, and third-party audits, and that accounts for about 16% of the assessment. And coverage. So this is the deployment across workforce and supply chain. So whether your ESG actions are deployed only in one business entity or whether it's across all of those business entities, countries, and further down your supply chain. And then in results, we've got reporting. So this is the KPIs, the multi-year data, and a third-party assurance weight. And also specific to EcoVadis is the 360 watch. So this is an external source that scans over 100,000 sources looking for both positive and negative results. So this could be in the media, any controversies your business has been involved with, any particularly positive things your business is engaging with, and you get a default score of 75, and this shifts up or down depending on what the 360 watch finds. And we can see here, as I mentioned earlier, the policies, actions, and results, and we can see how the management indicators fall into those. So we've got policies and endorsements in policies accounting for 25% of the score. We have measures, certifications, and coverage in the actions. And finally, on the bottom left here, we can see in the results is the reporting and the 360 watch findings. And the EcoVadis methodology is specific to industry, size, and geography. So the weighting varies between those three controls. Only the relevant criteria are selected depending on your business size, location, and needs. For example, logistics might get more environmental questions, whereas IT services or a consulting business, the assessment might be more weighted on labor and ethics, making sure that the assessment is specific and useful to your business needs. Larger firms face stricter expectations and have more detailed questions, and they're held to a higher standard than smaller businesses. And companies in the high-risk regions must assess and address specific questions on human rights or governance topics, ensuring that further kind of contextual risks are accounted for. And finally, leaving any activated criterion unanswered is accepted. So you're allowed to say NA or unsure on any questions, but this will lower your score. So the assessment really encourages people to respond to each of the questions and give evidence for everything to get the best possible score. And we can see here the scoring scale and how medals are calculated. So we've got bronze, silver, gold, and platinum medals under EcoVadis. And as I mentioned earlier, these are based on your percentile ranking. So how you compare to others who are doing the EcoVadis assessment, and with the platinum score only applying to the top 1%. And what we've seen is that even if you improve your EcoVadis score year on year, so you might, out of 100, be getting a consistently better score. If other companies are doing the same, you could actually stay in the same band or even drop. So it's really important to kind of continuously improve your internal and supply chain practices to ensure that your score stays as is or improves. And to get these medals, so all medals require a minimum of 30 out of 100 in every theme. If one theme drops below 30, you're not eligible for a medal at all. And any severe 360 watch issues may make a company ineligible regardless of score. So even if you're scoring over 85 out of 100, you might have one major controversy found by the 360 watch, and this means you're ineligible and your medal might be withheld or even withdrawn until that issue is resolved. And there are extra badges available for committed and fast movers. So those who are making a visible attempt at improving their ESG commitments and hoping to kind of improve their score through time. And we see on the right here that the score ranking, so it's out of 100, and EcoVadis translates that qualitative score into a quantitative ranking, going from insufficient at the bottom to outstanding at the top. So anything above 85 is considered outstanding. And finally, what does a platinum score mean? So as I said, platinum rating is reserved for the top 1% of all EcoVadis assessed companies. So it's a really amazing medal to be achieving. And again, it has that minimum 30 out of 100 required in every theme, with 1 weak score blocking eligibility for this medal. And what it signals is a very mature sustainability system, but it's not a product or ESG certification. So it's a reflection of your business practices and the system itself, but it's not a reflection of how your products are made. And this platinum score is widely recognized by global buyers, and again, as we mentioned, highlighted in RFPs or supplier pitches. So it can really help kind of attract and maintain business if you have this score. And once you've done your EcoVadis assessment, you get a strength and improvement areas scorecard. So this highlights where you're doing well and areas where you could be improving. Each improvement area has a priority level ranging from low to high to guide your corrective action. And what we recommend here is always focusing on the highest priority first, so focusing those efforts on the gaps that need it the most, e.g. missing KPIs or supplier audits, wherever your EcoVadis assessment guides you to. And the strengths are showing what works, but it's important to maintain them, but also to expand their coverage and depth where possible. So as I mentioned previously, you might be improving your efforts, but if everyone else around you is also doing so, it could impact your score. So you've really got to got to focus on expanding your coverage and depth. And finally, the improvement areas can be tracked in the EcoVadis corrective action plan tool and shared with customers. So this is a really nice way of engaging with your stakeholders and showing them what steps you're taking to improve your ESG score and your EcoVadis score itself. Now I'm going to pass on to Jasper, who's going to give some advice on the practical preparation for EcoVadis.
Thanks, Freddie. So now that you all hopefully have an understanding of the methodology of EcoVadis, let's kind of dive into the more practical elements and see what you can do as a reporting company to work towards that platinum score. What kind of things you need to look out for, and what are the pitfalls? The first thing that I want to start with is actually, before you even get the questionnaire, what can you do? So I think it's a very obvious one, but it is important to set the correct scope. So EcoVadis will ask you about your scope. As Freddie mentioned, that's based on size, location, and industry. And you need to do this carefully. So if you mention the wrong industry, or you mention that you're in a location that you're not in, actually, you might get questions that are not relevant to you, and you will then get pulled down in your scoring. You will also need to map key ESG risk for your sector or your region. So for example, if you work in logistics, make sure that you have metrics on fuel and safety policies ready, because these will be questions that they're going to ask you. Then again, for example, if you have a software company, they're less likely to ask you questions about fuel. So I mean, these things are quite obvious, but it hopefully gives you an understanding of EcoVadis really customizes every survey to every company profile. So think about kind of what are the logical steps or the logical questions that might be asked of a company like yours. Speak to perhaps your internal ESG expert, consult. I think ChatGPT might be a good one for this as well, to kind of get a basic understanding of, okay, which data points, which policies, which metrics should I get ready, so that you can already get started there. Also important is to form a cross-functional team with a project lead. We'll dive into more detail about why this is so important, but you only have 30 business days to report on EcoVadis once you get the survey. So you do really need a project lead to guide you through this process. I think without it, it's going to be chaotic, and you won't have everything kind of streamlined as effectively as possible. And of course, run a gap check to spot missing policies, KPIs, or certifications. And this is quite tricky to do when you don't know exactly what you're looking for, what they're asking, which is also why it might be good for the first year, but also for second and third years, to work with parties or third parties that know what they're going to ask and can provide you with context there, because EcoVadis is quite restrictive with this. They don't really share their surveys publicly, so you can't just look it up and see what they generally ask for. Also important is to start your document inventory early. So only formalized and dated documents count, with a maximum number of 55 documents being allowed. We'll dive into more detail about what that means in a second. But first, let's have a bit of a better look at understanding this 55 document limit. So this is really, it depends on your company if this is applicable. So if you're a big company, this might be a bit of a limiting factor. If you're a small company, then you're not going to run into any issues. So the hard cap here really is that 55 document per assessment, regardless of company size. And you should not use this kind of to merge unrelated files, because they will be rejected. If you have an emission report and a human rights policy and you put them in the same PDF and upload them, they will reject both of them and you'll be back to square one. Also, what you can do though is you can reuse valid documents from past assessments. So here EcoVadis allows you to use policies from until 8 years ago, and KPIs which are a max of 2 years old. And you can reuse those if you've used them in past years without eating into the 55 document limit. Also, I mean, this is quite obvious, but you should prioritize high-value documents such as ESG report, ISO certifications, codes of conduct, and KPI reports. And especially, for example, an ESG report is super, super useful. So we've spoken to many companies that have worked on EcoVadis before, and this ESG report forms the basis of your EcoVadis reporting. And for many questions, actually, you can attach the same document, and especially with an ESG report, which contains so many metrics and actions and targets and whatnot related to EcoVadis questions, you can report this several times. And also that brings me to my last tip here, is that you should use broad page references. So EcoVadis asks for page references. So every time you upload a document, it says which page should we look at for this question, and then you might say, look at page 3 to 5. But actually what you should do is to mention a much broader page range, just because there's no real downside to including a broad page range. But if there is actually something on another page that hasn't been included that would be relevant to you getting more points, they will automatically exclude that just because you've excluded it yourself. So, be broad here, mention a lot of pages that can only work in your benefit. Then let's have a look at some examples of high impact documents. So as I mentioned, we have the ESG report, which can be used for one of the management indicators, which is in reporting, of course, but also for policies and for coverage, if it's to show that it's company-wide scope. You have the codes of conduct, which are related to policies if they're formal commitments, but also endorsements if they're aligned with external principles. Then you have the ISO and the FSC certificates, which are, of course, certifications, but can also be applied to coverage, as they give an indication of what sites are included in the scope. And then you have the KPI reports, which are linked to reporting and results. Last but not least, you can include an audit report, which links to measures, but also certifications if it's external. And interestingly, also to 360 Watch if it has been validated externally. Moving on to a quick overview of examples of invalid or rejected documents. So for every document that's good to upload, there's also kind of a document that you shouldn't upload. And these are documents that are undated or unsigned because they're not considered official evidence. And here I would say might sound obvious, but really be careful here. We've heard a lot of stories of customers and other companies that reported on EcoVadis that have lost points just because they uploaded a perfectly good document, but then they didn't date it, or they for example, also omitted the company logo or even the company name. Small things that cost a lot of points further down the line. Also, make sure they're not out of date. So for policies, that's quite hard to do because they can date back to 8 years, but KPI should not be older than 2 years. And also expired certifications, of course, will not be counting. But also if it's not company specific. So if you have a group or parent document without proof that it applies to your entity, it will not be accepted. And as Freddie mentioned, you have policies accounting to 25% of your total points. But if it's an aspirational or draft document that counts as a one-off checklist or policies created just for the assessment, that will not score at all. So already, your policies count the least compared to kind of the actions and the targets. But here we also see that if you do mention policies, don't just put them together with ChatGPT so you can make your EcoVadis assessment complete, but really think about, okay, how do we connect this holistically? How do we connect the policy to our actual actions and the measures that we're taking? So that brings us to kind of a more actionable section here, which are some tips that we've provided per management indicator. So we've provided all 7 here, as Freddie mentioned, and I just wanted to quickly take you through the examples of what scores well versus what doesn't count. So let's start with policies. So what scores well if you make it specific and measurable. So you, for example, say we're going to cut CO2 by 30% by 2025. On the other hand, if you say we aim to be greener, that will not count at all. So these things, which we see a lot, unfortunately, this form of greenwashing, essentially, that will not count. For endorsement, it helps if you have a verifiable membership in the UN Global Compact or you're committed to the SBTI. But if you, for example, state that you're aligned with UN principles without actual proof or actually putting the work in, you will not get any points. For measures, if you show annual anti-corruption training logs, that will get you a lot of points versus claiming that claims of training with no records. And here it's interesting because companies have to have different kind of requirements of data quality or reporting quality based on their company size. And companies that are extra small, so that are very few employees, they're actually allowed to, for example, share photos of their training sessions. So if you have kind of a factory and you invite all of the employees of that factory together for a training session, you might not have a very explicit policy to substantiate that. But if you have photos of that session, you can use that as evidence for an extra small company. Of course, once you get to a bigger company, for example, medium company, which is up to 1,000 employees, then you will need to start providing a lot more policies and documents to support that. For certifications, current ISO 14001 or SA 8000 certificates, which are less than 3 years old, might be really good to show, but expired or draft certificates will not be accepted. For coverage, if you say that 90% of sites are ISO 45001 certified or company-wide rollouts, that's really good because it basically just shows that you've taken your whole company into account and not only cherry-picked the things that are more visible. What doesn't count, or what counts less, is if you only certified one site while ignoring the others. For reporting, it's really important that you report multi-year KPIs such as greenhouse gas data with external assurance. But of course, if you just provide a single year unaudited spreadsheet of kind of your scope 3, that will count far less or not count at all. And then last but not least, for the 360 watch findings, this what scores well is actually if an NGO has disclosed an issue based on your company, but you've disclosed that with a corrective action plan, that will be really beneficial. So it doesn't mean that you cannot have anything that's being flagged by 360, but you do need to deal with it proactively. And if you hide those scandals or you leave them unresolved, that will cost you. So a bit of an overview on carbon management and scope 3. So the EcoVadis carbon module evaluates greenhouse gas measurements, targets, for example, SBTi, and reduction initiatives. And for most companies, you need to provide a full greenhouse gas inventory, which covers scope 1, 2, and 3. Also because major buyers expect this. So we're seeing in the market that 92% expect ESG data included scope 3 from suppliers in 2024. And we also know that CSRD, SBTi, and EcoVadis make scope 3 reporting a requirement. Now, a requirement within EcoVadis is kind of a flexible term, because while they will ask you this question and they want you to answer it, the reporting is not mandatory. So you can leave it empty, but it will cost you points. And those points will then also perhaps mean that you don't get platinum, or you don't get gold or silver or bronze, depending on where you end up. So quick overview of kind of the performance levels based on the ranking that EcoVadis provides for the greenhouse gas measurements. So if you have no greenhouse gas management system at all, you will get an insufficient and get no points. If you have some elements of a system or reporting, you will get some points. So you'll be a beginner. Then it goes on to good, where you have a core system with public reporting. Advanced, meaning that you have a comprehensive system, plus you have science-based targets and a third-party verification. And then if you're a leader, you have a best-in-class system, net zero ambitions approved by science-based targets. So this is kind of an overview that they provide, and also helps companies then estimate, okay, where do I need to invest my efforts if I want to get a lot of points in this section. So here, kind of a proposed reporting timeline based on what works for you. Of course, this is flexible, but generally you only have 30 working days or 30 business days. So it is quite a tight deadline. I would say pre-day 0, you can already do a lot. So get the necessary documents and requirements together, see what you need to do, speak to the right people, set up a team, set up a lead, so that everything can be kicked off smoothly once you reach out to EcoVadis. And then on day 1, make sure you receive your invitation into the platform and confirm your deadline. So we've also heard that the deadline of 30 days doesn't always apply, and you can also ask for extensions. So make sure that this also applies to you, and align on that, and set up your kickoff meeting internally. Then in week 1 to 3, you will collect your evidence by theme, and you should attach documents as you go, not at the end. And what we often recommend is to use the Excel offline template or software. So we know that kind of the internal EcoVadis platform isn't that smooth for uploading these documents. So what most companies do is they download the Excel and they kind of track everything in there, and then they share that with colleagues. But if you really want to have a kind of a software that tracks everything and aligns everything, you might want to use a software solution. And then in week 4, you'll want to do an internal review. So for every question where you check yes, that we have something, you need to have assurances that you have a valid document. So you need to be kind of within the validity of the limits of expiration. And then in the last week, you need to do a final polish and confirm the page references, file readability, and of course the document count being under 55. So now let's have a look at what it means to get towards platinum. There's a couple of things that are important to keep in mind here. But one is to kind of act on the improvement areas. So you should treat your improvement areas on the scorecard as an action list, because each comes with a priority, as already mentioned, low, medium, and high. And every of these things should be treated carefully and kind of worked on proactively for the coming years. And you should also log your actions in the corrective action plan tool and assign owners and deadlines. So this can happen within EcoVadis. You should tackle high weight gaps first, of course. So missing KPIs, supplier monitoring, or training programs, things that you can do within a year that carry a lot of weight, you should really focus on. And integrate your actions into existing business plan, such as HR adding diversity targets. Then you need to reassess, and only after you have reassessed, you should reassess only after improvements are implemented. A bit of a tongue twister, but no, I mean, yeah. So only reassess after the improvements have been implemented, so that your company can report and actually, mention that it has made improvements. And here, a bit of a side note, actually, because as Freddie mentioned, EcoVadis scoring and the medals are relative to the percentage. You might actually be more sustainable in the years to come, but because it's a relative index, so it goes up with everyone that improves. You might not necessarily then also move up with the whole group if you improve slower than the rest. So if you're in gold and you want to get to the top 1%, that top 1% will also continuously be improving. So that also makes it quite competitive to stay within a certain category. And then this point here about maintaining momentum. So what we often see is that the 1% integrates EcoVadis into supplier selection. So we're seeing this with kind of the forward-thinking companies. Once they talk to companies in the procurement process, they're actually looking at making sure that they stick to certain ESG data points and KPIs. And we know that EcoVadis is often one. So we actually have a lot of people that have knocked on our door at Coolset and have said, well, we need to report on EcoVadis because our supplier expects us to. And if we want to work with them, and they're usually quite big suppliers, then we need to work with EcoVadis. I know that one big supermarket chain in the Netherlands is working with it and is expecting this of all of their suppliers. So also we see that platinum firms link ESG to board oversight and executive pay for accountability. So for example, CEOs, for example, often get bonuses based on their financial performance, but now we're starting to see that companies are also paying out bonuses based on sustainability performance. So if you have a CEO that says, well, we're going to include sustainability here, we're going to include it there, we're going to track it, that might be also tied to a new type of bonus, which we're going to see more in the future, hopefully. Of course, it's a continuous cycle. So policies should be reviewed every 2 years and KPI should be updated annually. And you should do regular audits plus stakeholder inputs to close the gaps and prevent 360-watch penalties. And then last but not least, what's really important here and often underestimated is that employee training and engagement ensures ESG is practiced company-wide. And of course, employee training has kind of a limited reach in terms of your environmental impact. But what I do see often is that doing these trainings really changes the perception of sustainability inside of the company. So if you just have a day where you say, well, we're going to talk internally about how we're working on our goals or how we consume certain products, that already changes significantly the setup of, I think, the way companies think about sustainability and perhaps also how those employees think about sustainability in their own work and then carry that forward. So these are really important things to do. And then here, the top 5 things, the top 5 must-dos for a platinum score. So you need to balance your PAR, so your policies, actions, and results. You need to show a lot more than just commitments. So make sure that you have good policies, but that they're also aligned with your actions and your results. You also need to meet all the theme minimums. So always have more than 30 points in each theme. Otherwise, you'll get no medal regardless of your score. You also need to submit high-value docs, such as a sustainability report, ISO certifications, KPI data. Keep it under 55, of course, and close the gaps via the corrective action plan. So act on high priority improvement areas and reassess this annually. Also, of course, and I think this speaks for itself, but it's important to also keep in mind, stay controversy-free. So you need to manage your risks proactively, and you need to understand that severe 360-watch findings override strong scores. So now really briefly about what we do at Coolset. So the last couple of months, we've spent some time working on these solutions. And I'll just quickly whiz through these slides and then get to the Q&A so we have enough time to answer all of your questions. So what we do is we centralize our evidence. You upload your policies, your certificates, and your reports once, and we track everything automatically to every question. Coolset also maps them automatically to the criteria. So you upload a document in the central page, and it goes through every single section of the EcoVadis module, whether it's human rights or environment, whether it's kind of a metric or an engagement data point, and it will map it automatically if it's relevant. Of course, you will still have the choice to select whether you want to confirm or not. So you always have control over the process, and it helps you build a single reliable evidence base from day one. You can also reuse past work, so you can reference last year's EcoVadis submissions instantly and avoid recreating policies or re-uploading unchanged documents, and you can maintain version control across assessments and frameworks. You can track progress in real time, so the dashboard shows completion status and coverage gaps. You can monitor team contributions across departments, and you can spot bottlenecks and missing evidence before the deadlines even happen. And you can collaborate without friction. So you can assign tasks and approvals directly in the platform. You can tag reviewers to specific documents or questions, and you can replace email chains and Excel trackers with one shared workspace. And of course, you can submit with confidence. So you can export a clean, ready to submit assessment package, every field linked to source evidence, which is essentially also your audit-ready trail, and you reduce errors, duplication, and last-minute scrambles. I hope that was quick enough. I always try to kind of go through this part quickly so we can actually focus on the questions. Of course, if you do have more questions about Coolset, here also is our email address and a QR code to see our platform live. There's a bit of an interactive demo that you can use. For those that are on the computer, feel free to just go to coolset.com/EcoVadis to see more. Now let's get to the questions. I've seen a lot of questions coming in, and I'm just scrolling through it, and yeah, it's quite a lot. So what I'll do is I'll start with the top one, and in the meantime, if you would kind of be so kind to go through the questions that have been asked and to upvote the ones that you want to see answered as well, that will help us kind of prioritize the questions to focus on during the session, so that we can then go for the questions that we have time for. I'm going to start with this question that has 5 upvotes by now. A question by Patrick. Do large international corporations usually apply for one EcoVadis report at group level, or various EcoVadis reports for each of the geographical units or business units? Really good questions. So we're seeing it depend. Some companies report on kind of the group level, whereas others want to have their own kind of internal targets and their own marketing efforts as well, and they break it down. So we're seeing both is possible. EcoVadis does allow both kind of options, but we're seeing that this is carried out across different levels. I couldn't tell you numbers exactly what the split is between kind of group level reporting and subsidiary level reporting, but we see that both is an option. Quickly gonna see which questions have some upvotes. Question here from Beatrice. What happens to dated documents registered as active by EcoVadis, but actually out of date for the business? So that's a good question. If you have a document that is dated and is allowed within kind of the limits of EcoVadis, so it's a policy document that's less than 8 years old, or a KPI document that's less than 2 years old, then it is acceptable. But also good to know that you should always update to show the most relevant, the most recent, also because this gives you more points if you can show that you're improving your KPIs or your policies year on year. Question here that has 6 upvotes. I'm liking that everyone's kind of on board with the upvoting. Is EcoVadis the most adopted methodology for rating? What are the comparable ratings alternative to EcoVadis? This is a really good question. This is what we're talking about a lot as well internally. So we know that there is, for example, there's a couple other ESG rating services. Some are commercial, some are private. We're seeing a lot of companies switching actually from VSME to EcoVadis. VSME was kind of the commercial, the regulatory framework, but we also know that other platforms like CDP is a big one, but also, for example, I know that recently I was looking into SupplyShift and SEDEX. these are also some of the other alternatives, but they're mostly focused on carbon accounting. So what we know is that there's some commercial ones, then of course there's the regulatory ones. So CZRD is a big one, GRI, ISSB. SBTI is not a rating, but it is kind of used by companies to show that they're on track with their sustainability performance, just like they are with EcoVadis. Let me have another look at which questions are scoring well. And just going through this here. Apologies, it's always a bit of a scramble to go through these questions live and see which ones are the most relevant. Question here from Marietta with 2 upvotes. So unless your KPIs are externally assured, they don't count, even if a company has published ESG reports for several years. No, they do count. You don't always have to audit everything, but an audit can help give you better scores. So the score is often not absolute, but it can mean that it gives you kind of when it's from 0 to 100, and that 100 contains, for example, an audit, and then something below 50 and 100 contains a result without an audit. So it kind of depends on your company and your ambition level, but an audit is by no means always required. Here, a question from Slavana. What do you mean by 360 watch validated externally? What example do you have? I was under the impression for 360 watch, the company cannot submit anything. It's true, so you cannot submit anything, but what you do need to keep in mind is that if it's your second year of reporting, they might already have done an assessment and they might have flagged certain things. So you want to be sure to report on those proactively. And of course, what they'll review is things that you probably already know. So if you know that an NGO has published a report that mentions your company negatively, you might want to deal with that proactively and state in a policy or kind of an action that you're working on that, okay, we know that, for example, we're contributing to deforestation as published by this NGO, and we're working on that by, for example, changing our suppliers. So these things can help in mitigating the risks of a 360 watch finding. Let's see. It's a lot of good questions, so I'm trying to prioritize. Well, the first question actually that was asked, I'll give this one a quick overview as well. What is the omnibus proposal? This is a European kind of proposal published first by the European Commission, and it's an effort to water down sustainability regulations in the European Union. So they have a couple of regulations that are covered by the proposal, which include the CSRD and the CSDDD, and they want to basically up the scope. So it used to be companies with 250 plus employees. Now they're saying we want to go up to 1,000 employees or even 3,000 employees. Any company below that doesn't have to report on the new sustainability rules. So that's also why I think that some companies are now switching to the more commercial frameworks, such as EcoVadis. Question here also from Patrick. How should we view the worth and validity of the EcoVadis assessment? In a way, it seems a sort of marketing tool where you can get medals by having documents in place, but online audits do not always reflect true circumstances. What is your view on this? Yeah, very true. So I do think that there's kind of a trade-off to be made when you look at the commercial versus the regulatory frameworks, with EcoVadis, of course, being a commercial one. But I do think there's a lot of value in combining market incentives with ESG incentives. So companies that are asked, for example, by suppliers to work in EcoVadis are suddenly having internal discussions about how to improve their score, also to increase their competitive advantage. So I do think that it is a marketing tool, but I don't think that excludes the kind of value of it being also a tool to reduce emissions, to improve accountability in the value chain, and to just overall have a more sustainable company going forward. I see we're kind of we're nearing the end of our time. I'll answer one more question and then leave you for today. I'll have the question here from Dan. In your experience, which type of organization can extract most business value from a good EcoVadis score, for example, sector, business size, geography, place in the supply chain, etc. I think this isn't really limited to one type of company. So a lot of companies report on EcoVadis, and based on your sector, based on your size, based on your geography, you will get different questions. So every company has its own questions. Every company can learn a lot about its company based on the questions that are being asked, and also how they are able to answer or not able those questions. So I think it's a really broad framework that applies to a lot of companies, and really is also a way to do an assessment of, okay, where do we stand today? What do we need to do going forward? I think that was all the time we have today. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. I really enjoyed organizing this webinar. If you do have any questions about EcoVadis going forward, you know where to find us. You can email us either at jasper@coolset.com or frederica@coolset.com, or you can check it out on coolset.com/EcoVadis. For now, wishing you a lovely Tuesday and see you soon. Thank you.